What's going on, guys? Dan from SSG bringing you another Edison format deck profile. This time I'm profiling my take on the Infernity deck. This deck is pretty sweet. It just does a lot of cool different things, and let's get right into it. We have the full 3 copies of Infernity Archfiend, of course. Although Infernitys are fairly limited in their engine, Infernity Archfiend is one of the better cards in the archetype, and it's available to us here in Edison format. Whenever it's summoned, it can grab an Infernity to our hand, and we're most likely going to be searching out one of the 3 copies of Infernity Necromancer that we play. These are just the main engine of this deck, right? We're going to be able to get a lot of value off of these cards, try to abuse them as much as we can. Of course, whenever we summon out our Necromancer, it's going to essentially net a +2, reborning our Infernity Archfiend and then adding another Infernity to our hand. And that interaction is very powerful. We're going to try to build our deck to abuse that sort of interaction, as it can be a +1 or even a +2 at times, just getting value out of our graveyard and then trying to utilize these cards while they're in play to actually get value out of those cards and try and use them for comboing off on our opponent. But Infernity is pretty sweet archetype. I do like the Infernity archetype quite a bit, and I think it's interesting we get to play it in Edison. We have a full 3 copies of Dark Grepher. Because we want Necromancer and Archfiend in the graveyard as fast as possible, we want to max out on Dark Grepher, just to kind of get those cards in the grave. And there's a bunch of other monsters we want to send in the graveyard as well. So very powerful here. It's going to be our main starter on turn 1. And then I like to play 1 copy of the Armageddon Knight. I think I was kind of in between 2 and 1 on this card. I think that it kind of supports the Dark Greffers, but it's just like a mid-game card that can search the specific thing you need. Because on turn 1, you really do want the Dark Grepher to get both the Archfiend and the Necromancer in the graveyard. However, that's not always possible, so I think the one Armageddon Knight just kind of like helps out with the Dark Engine, getting that in the grave. We then play 2 copies of Destiny Hero Malicious. Some builds are playing this, I see, and some aren't. I like this card a lot, as you guys know in my previous profiles. If you've watched them, I think Malicious just is one of the most powerful cards, that kind of just like an engine in itself, and in Edison format, that just means a lot. I think having sort of value out of your graveyard, especially when you're discarding cards for value with Dark Grepher, just get this card in your grave and it's going to do some really nasty things. Of course, this is a synchro deck, combo control style deck, and this kind of just plays a lot of different roles in this deck and just really gets you to make synchros out of nowhere, and very powerful card. Comboing with the 2 Malicious, we have the 1 copy of plaguespreader Zombie. We're sending darks to our graveyard all the time with Dark Grepher, Armageddon Knight. We're going to want to play plaguespreader Zombie. It's one of the most powerful tuner monsters in the game's history, but definitely in Edison format. Very, very powerful here. And then the other 2 tuners I'm electing to play are the 2 copies of krebons. So I see some people playing Diva. I prefer krebons for a few different reasons. I think Emergency Teleport is, of course, one of the most powerful cards in Edison format. Just bringing out a tuner out of your deck is extremely powerful. But the fact that these are dark monsters is very important to combo with our Dark Grepher and our Armageddon Knight, because we do get to play the telekinetic power well. And I'll sort of get into that more once we get to that, but I think having access to the 2 krebons is pretty strong, and I think a tuner monster that can protect itself is really important in this deck as well. So I like to play the 2 krebons over the 2 Diva, because I think it just gives you powerful access to some spell cards that we'll get into. I'm also playing 1 copy of Mystic Tomato. This is kind of like a interesting card I always try to fit into my Infernity decks, because I think it's really interesting and kind of just searches out what you need. I think as a one-of, it's just kind of a utility card, but I think having the krebons in the deck makes it so that I want access to this, right? I want access to the krebons off of Tomato, and then we can normal summon and start getting into our Infernity plays. But this can search out Armageddon Knight, it searches out Malicious, searches out plaguespreader Zombie, krebons, as I mentioned, as well as the Infernity Necromancer, which is very powerful as well. So I think it just does a lot for the deck. I think it's like a little one-of, like, you don't really need to max out on it or anything like that, but it does a lot for the deck, and it adds some consistency where we might need it. So I do like the 1 Tomato here. That is all the monsters. Onto the spells, we of course have the powerful Emergency Teleport. I think it's just one of the best cards in Edison, as I mentioned. Just extremely, extremely powerful, and especially in this deck where we're going to have a lot of these floating monsters that don't necessarily do anything, you know, like a Necromancer in play doesn't really do much except for threat and more card advantage. The same with the Infernity Archfiend. If they have bigger monsters, our Archfiends aren't really doing anything, so having access to Emergency Teleport to get tuners out of the deck is very, very strong, and being able to synchro with those floating pieces is very powerful. And the reason why I'm running the Krebons engine over the Divas is, of course, the teleport alongside 2 copies of telekinetic power well. Card's just really, really powerful. I think that it lets you just combo off more often, and in the late game, it's way more consistent than like trying to search a diva with Sangan or like try to draw it or something like that. So I think like you're going to have ways that send darks into the graveyard, so you can send krebons at times to make this live, but later in the game, this is just like a diva, but without wasting your normal summon, right? You're going to drop this down, reborn 2 krebons out of your graveyards, and it's not uncommon in this deck because you have 3 grepher, you have armageddon knight, you have emergency teleport, you have natural drawing the krebons. You're going to have a lot of ways to get those krebons into the graveyard, and this is going to be 2 tuner monsters, which is really strong as well, and I do like it a little better than Diva as well, because you can set all of these cards. If you don't want to use them right away, you can set them, make sure your Infernity effects can go off, and then once you're ready to use your synchro plays and combo off on your opponent, that's when you can flip these over and start doing work. So I think this card is extremely powerful, and teleport's, of course, a very, very powerful card. So pretty interesting engine there. I do like the teleport engine. I like to play 1 Allure of Darkness, just kind of a consistency card. Sometimes you can get clogged up with dark monsters in your hand, get them out of there. And also, you can always just make this live later in the game by searching out off of your archfiend and then drawing 2, just sort of like a pot of greed, essentially, which I think is powerful. We have a reinforcement of the army. We got to find that grepher on turn 1. We play Rhoda to do it. Also, of course, we can get the Armageddon Knight. But we do have Foolish Burial as well. Foolish is good. Sometimes you have to send krebons to make your telekinetic power well live. Sometimes you're sending malicious to make some sort of synchro play. Sometimes you're sending plaguespreader zombie. There's a lot of different things you can do with Foolish Burial in this deck. Most of the time you're going to send an archfiend, then normal summon your necromancer and get value that way. Very good card. Just kind of can replace itself in a lot of ways in this deck, so we play it. And then I'm electing to play Brain Control as well as Mind Control. Really powerful because I think you have a lot of access to those krebons, to your plaguespreader zombie. And although you're only having 3 tuners in your deck, you have a lot of ways to go find them, whether sending them to the graveyard, then reborning them, or just by just having emergency teleport too, right? Just teleport plus this card is just an insane play. I think both these cards are very powerful as long as you can special summon your tuner monster, because then you don't really haven't used a normal summon. Really, really strong in combination with the tuner cards that you're playing, especially the spells that can summon your tuners out of the deck or out of the graveyard. So very powerful here. You're going to make a lot of different plays with them. On to trap cards. We have the all-star of the deck, 3 copies of Limit Reverse. This is sort of the +2 card of the deck that everyone's talking about, where if you set this card and then reborn a necromancer, that's like a +1, right? And then your necromancer's effect, bring back archfiend, getting another card into play, and then archfiend is going to search another card. So technically getting like 2 or 3 cards off of this, and it's just extremely powerful. You can also just summon like plaguespreader zombie if you need a tuner out of your graveyard, right? So card's just really interesting. It does a lot of different things, and it's just going to keep those Infernities getting value over time. Really, really powerful card in this deck. And for the same reason, if we're going to play 3 Limit Reverse, we're going to play the 1 copy of Call of the Haunted, as it's just sort of a better copy of the Limit Reverse. So this card's really good. We're going to be setting a lot of cards as we are sort of a combo control deck. And this is sort of a card you can kind of disguise. These cards you can disguise with your interactive back row pieces, and then like on the following turn, just flip them over and start doing really nasty stuff. So we have the full 4 reborn trap cards. And then we have a full 3 play set of Starlight Road. Starlight Road's really interesting. I think you can play 3 in very specific decks. I think because you're in this deck, you're kind of forced to drop all your back row to the board, and this is just going to make it so you don't get heavy stormed. And of course, it's going to be excellent in some matchups. Like, I think having this card at 3 against like Judgment Dragon, Geyserus, this card can just win you matchups by having the card at 3. Icarus Attack it's very good against as well. So card's just really good. I think, of course, you have to play at least 2 copies, but I like the 3 because like you can just blow out a lot of different matchups that are relevant in the metagame, as well as just being sure you don't get heavy stormed, because you're going to have to set your whole hand, and you want to have access to Starlight Road basically every time you have to do that. So I do have the 3 copies of Starlight Road. Onto some interaction, we have 2 copies of Bottomless, of course, just standard removal here. Card's very strong. Of course, we have the 2 copies of Dimensional Prison. alongside 2 copies of Wing Blast. Now, you say you don't really want cards in your hand. This is one way to get rid of them, right? Get the malicious out of hand, things like that. But also just searching off of your archfiend, right, for value. Then you just like pitch the thing you're searching, and you just get a free Wing Blast, which is really strong. So I think 2 Wing Blasts is just fine. I wouldn't go up to 3 on the card. Just kind of like a solid card, and does a lot of work in the format, as we know. Onto some 1-ofs. We have the Solemn Judgment. We have Mirror Force, Torrential Tribute, and the 1 Return from Different Dimension. I love Return in these style of decks where you can just have early access to Malicious and Plaguespreader Zombie. You're going to be able to return and make some level 8 synchros, and it's extremely powerful. Very strong card. Of course, people are going to be DD Crowing you as well. This is also a good answer for that. They DD Crow your Archfiend, and you really need access to that card advantage engine. Go ahead, bring back that 1 Archfiend for half your life. Get that engine flowing again. Really powerful. That's the main deck, so we're going to move on to the extra deck, and it's basically just a toolbox of synchros, so we're going to go right through them. We have the magical android as well as catastor. We have a bunch of level 6s here. We have bionac, really important card in this deck because we need to be able to get rid of our hand and also just use those valuable cards. You know, we're getting value to our hand over and over again. We can use that to gain tempo when we have a bionac in play. We then have the Goyo Guardian, as well as flamvell urquizas, and Bionac Force of the Earth. So some toolbox level 6s there. Then we're on to 7. We have the 1 copy of Black Rose, and 8, 2 Stardust for the Starlight Roads, but we can also make Stardust fairly easily in this deck, so electing to place 2 Stardust. I'm going with 1 copy of the Dark End Dragon. I would love to play more of this card. I'm just kind of like having trouble fitting it into this deck. I think you just want the toolbox of everything, so it's kind of making me a little bit difficult to find room for the second one, especially when you have to play 2 Stardust Dragons at a minimum. But I think maybe you could cut the Bionac Force of the Earth for the second one, as this card is extremely powerful. You just win a lot of games where you summon this card, so I think I want to go up to 2, but 1 is good for now. Onto the rest of the level 8s, we have the 1 copy of Colossal Fighter, very powerful. We have the Red Dragon Archfiend, as well as the Thought Ruler Archfiend. Good toolbox options there. And of course, we have Mistworm. We're going to be able to make Mistworm pretty consistently in this deck, having the Archfiend plus Necromancer combo, plus our krebons or plaguespreader zombie. All 3 of those go away for a Mistworm, and then you can, call the Haunted and keep getting all those monsters back. So card is going to be very good for us. And then I have the 1 Chimera Tech for Cyber Dragons in the sideboard. And quick sideboard rundown: 2 copies of Cyber Dragon, 2 copies of Lightning Vortex. I'm electing to run 2 copies of Soul Release. I think the card's pretty interesting. You need to have a reason to not play DD Crow and for this card to be relevant. I think that it does different things than DD Crow, but I do prefer Crow in general. But in this deck, Crow, we need to be able to have an empty hand, and this card you can just set, right? And if you're not ready to use it yet, you can set it and forget it until you are ready to use it. So DD Crow is just going to rot in your hand. I do like the 2 Soul Releases, and a lot of times when you're kind of gaining card advantage and maybe not making any sort of pushes, waiting for the opponent to respond, a lot of times their graveyard can get pretty filled up in those situations where you're just beating down with an Archfiend. So I think this card can kind of just erase that, and then you can keep going with your game plan moving forward. We have 1 copy of MST here, and that is it for the spells. We go to trap cards, 2 copies of Dust Tornado, more back or removal. We have 2 copies of Pulling the Rug. I think Kaias can really impact your engine by banishing the Infernity Archfiend, cutting you off of your card advantage, and that's sort of the entire emphasis of the deck, right? So we want to be able to protect our card advantage engine. And we have 2 copies of Light Imprisoning Mirror. Card's just pretty solid. I don't want to run into Light Orange or anything like that. Just kind of just get rid of those light effects. I've been liking this card a lot recently. I have 1 copy of Trap Hole for mainly Blackwings, just having extra removal for them. And then the one last card would not be an SSG profile without it. The 1 copy of Trap Dust Shoot, of course. Draw this card on turn 1, and you are a better player than your opponent, so we're going to run that. And that is about it, guys. Let me know what you guys thought about the deck in the comments section below. This is definitely a little of a throwback, right? You don't really expect Infernities to be a solid deck in the Edison format, but I think it just does a lot of work. It's a pretty interesting deck and kind of is very, very sweet. It does a lot of cool combos, can really combo off and kill your opponent, but also just be like a value deck, which is pretty sweet. So that is about it, guys. So, without further ado, this is Dan V from SSG signing out.